Hello and welcome again to this episode of This Much is True Crime episode, Professor Wilson, 16, and we're still here, not been found out yet, as I always used to say until I was. That's good. But also, of course, what it means is that you've already got a following, but hopefully it helps, wait for it, your new tour.
Oh, that's very kind that you're segueing into my tour. Yes, I go on tour in September, October. The tour is called A History of Britain in 20 Murders. So it's not a history of murder. It's using murder cases to discuss Britain from 1885 through to the current day, to 2025. So I use 20 different murders to open up the Victorian period, the interwar period, the post-Second World War period, and contemporary culture. So on tour, I've been I'll be thinking about specific murders that I can talk to the audience about that gives a different flavor of how Britain developed in the modern era from the accepted history that we've been given in the past.
And people can ask questions. Is there a Q&A thing in this as well?
So the first half of the theatre show is me talking about A History of Britain in 20 Murders. Then there's a break, which gives me an opportunity to look at the questions that the audience have written down as they've come in to the theatre. And I'll go through those questions to see which ones feel suitable in terms of what we've been discussing. I always get asked the usual questions. You know the questions I'm going to be asked as well, don't you?
You get any merchandise, any merch at all? You get sort of Psycho Killer t-shirts?
I don't have any merchandise
You're
other
missing
than my
out.
books. Obviously, I'll be selling a book to coincide with the tour, which is also called A History of Britain in 20 Murders.
And if people want to know where, when, and how to get tickets and things, how do they get in touch?
www.crimesofbritain.co.uk. That takes you directly to the page where you can get tickets. The tour starts on 18th of September in Buckingham. Then we go, which of course is where I live. Then we go to Northampton, then to Birmingham, and then there are, I think, 7 dates in Scotland, then back into England.
All right, don't name them all. Okay, all right, that's enough. Now, you might think that's a cheap commercial plug, which in a way it is, but it does lead on to the reason that we're talking today, which is about your profession as such,
Yes.
as criminologists. And one case in particular that's in the news now, that of Bryan Kohberger, who himself was a PHD Criminology student. Who is now admitting he murdered, as they slept, 4 students in Moscow, Idaho in November 2022. Now, I first came across this, or was first told about this, at my This Morning Christmas party in early December 2022,
right?
When 2 of my very best young producers came up, 2 women producers came up and said, we are fascinated by this case in Idaho, in Moscow, Idaho. Have you heard about it? And I hadn't. And they still hadn't caught anybody by this point. And they said, yeah, it's just like students, 4 of them killed as they slept in their beds. No one knows why, no motive. Hunts on, can't find anyone. We should go out, we should be doing it. Christmas came and we didn't do any more about it. And then someone was arrested for it. So fill us in as to how we got there. But the interesting thing is, and why we're talking about it, I think the most interesting thing is that he's a criminology student who is behind it.
Yeah, so you're right. This is a story when 4 students in the same house were murdered by a PhD student in criminology called Bryan Kohberger. And Kohberger had done his master's at a different university from where the murders took place in Pennsylvania. He did his master's in Pennsylvania, and his master's had been about the crimes of Dennis Rader, who actually was a serial killer in Wichita in Kansas. So he kills these 4 students, and then there's a manhunt to find him. That manhunt takes some 7 weeks before he's finally arrested. There is some evidence at the crime scene that could be harvested by the police themselves to get some sense of who might have committed these murders. But effectively, one night, Kohberger went into this house. He seems to have been targeting one particular student, a student called Madison Mogan. We don't know if he had any prior relationship with the people that he kills, but it's probably true that he was targeting her because he went immediately to her room. She happened to be sharing that room on that evening with another student, and I think that rather put him at a disadvantage. So he kills both of them. Lots of overkill. He stabs them. The murder weapon itself has never been found. And in the course of killing Madison Mogan and Kaylee Goncalves, he then also kills Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin. And Xana and Ethan were a boyfriend-girlfriend. What's also interesting is that there were two other students in the house where he commits these 4 murders, and he doesn't attempt to kill those other 2 people in the house at that time. He leaves behind at the scene of the crime the sheath to the knife, and that sheath is going to have DNA that can link him directly to the crime itself. But initially, the police they do old-fashioned stuff, Martin. They knock on doors, they look at CCTV, they look at triangulating phone masts and who was using cell phones at that particular time. The car catches him because he's driving down that street. That's really what's going to lead them to making him their prime suspect. And then, of course, they're going to follow him. It's Christmas time when they catch him, so he's going home away from the University of Washington, not the University of Idaho. Idaho and Washington are very closely, they're neighboring states. So he leaves the University of Washington, where he's a PhD student in criminology, to go home to Pennsylvania. The police follow him there, and that's where they're going to get some of the DNA to see if he is indeed the person who left the DNA on the sheath that they were able to recover from the crime scene.
So they catch him, and of course, because of these crimes and where they're committed, he's facing the death penalty.
Yeah.
And several years pass, and it's only literally in the past few days, he's decided with his lawyers, he's going to plead guilty, which allows him to escape the death penalty.
That is true. He's taken the plea, and the plea takes the death penalty as an option off the table. He will spend the rest of his life in jail. He has no appeals as a consequence of the plea that he has accepted. And until he accepted the plea bargain and went into court only 48 hours ago, he had pled not guilty and remained silent in terms of his part in this crime. But now he's admitting that he is the killer. And of course, that plea deal, the state of Idaho still has capital punishment. They use firing squad, if memory serves me correctly. He would have faced the firing squad. And of course, this has angered some of the victims' families, although other victims' families have been pleased about the plea deal because they feel it brings some closure to what has happened.
But also it means that they're not forced to go into court to sit and listen, or people are not forced to go through the whole experience again. What they would like to hear from him is why.
Oh, everybody loves the motive, don't they? And we will never find out that motive, I imagine. Although one can guess. You were very kind pointing out that this is my profession. I am a criminologist. I work mostly with people who've committed murder, sometimes serial murder, although this in itself would be regarded as a mass murder.
We'll come on to that in a second. But just on the criminology thing, so I note that his professor has now come out, and she is speaking now that he has admitted guilt, but she hasn't up until this point, and she just couldn't believe it was him. But having said that, she, thousands of criminology professors, academics teach this stuff.
Yeah.
at some point, and even she alluded to this, at some point you question yourself, am I going too far? Am I giving them too much information? Or do you look around the classroom, do you see, crikey, oh gosh, I'm not sure that person should be here. They seem to be just taking too much of this in.
His tutor was Kathleen Ramsland, whom I have met, and I absolutely know her work. And what she's saying now publicly is something that chimes a great deal with my own experiences, which is that I now very consciously, and have for some time, self-censor. Whether I'm talking to students or a public audience, less so with professional audiences, but if I'm talking to students, I sometimes think, well, they don't need this information.
When you say, well, what do you mean self-censor? You don't tell them how it was committed or weapons used or...
Yeah,
the nuts and bolts of it.
I sometimes think they don't need this information. They might... I've realized that every single student audience for the past few years, I've realized that there are people in that audience who will be consuming the information that I'm privy to, not in a way that's helpful in terms of criminology is about making our communities safer. Criminology is a wonderful discipline that's trying to eradicate crime, if you put it that way. And I became acutely aware that there were some people that were consuming information in a kind of fetishistic way and in a way that they were fantasizing about it. And I mean, as bizarre as this seems, Martin, there are some people in Western culture who idealize murderers and serial murderers and who see them as aspirational figures. And the ones that you worry about the most are the students that come up to you, and they do, and they say, I'm obsessed with serial killers. Or, in one occasion, I'm writing to serial killers. And they were maintaining a correspondence with somebody who was a serial killer and imprisoned in the United States. And, you know, as somebody, as you know, I've worked with these guys for years. And I'm like, why are you doing that?
And can you flag this up to the authorities and say, look, this person should be off the course?
The great thing is, because they're so obsessed with serial killers, when they realize that criminology is a theoretical discipline as much as an applied discipline, they get bored. And so often they won't complete the module, complete the course. They drop out because what they want the course to be is a kind of serial killer 101. They want to know everything about serial killers.
Well, they want it next level true crime podcast, don't they? That's what they want.
And I'm not delivering that. I'm very consciously trying to explain, well, I'm not delivering that. And actually, when I did teach a module on the phenomenon of serial murder, I taught it from a theoretical perspective because, you know, you can understand the serial killer either from what's happening in their head, the medical psychological tradition, or you can understand the phenomenon from what's called a structural tradition. You know, which cultures at what particular periods of time produce more or less serial killers. So I tend to take a very victim approach to the phenomenon of serial murder, as opposed to this relentless, fetishized approach to the individual serial killer.
How would Kohberger's studies have helped him with this killing?
Well, the only connection that I can see, because I do think there is a connection, and I flagged this up in some of the journalistic pieces that I've written about this in the wake of Kohberger's arrest, is that Kathleen Ramsland is an expert on Dennis Rader. Dennis Rader is an American serial killer from Wichita in Kansas. And Dennis Rader is a very unique serial murderer in that the very first crimes that he commits, serial killers often start very small and grow into the role of being a serial killer. Not Dennis Rader. Dennis Rader first kills 4 people in the same family, in the same house. He wipes out an entire family called the Otero family. He may have been targeting the daughter of in the Otero family, but to get to the daughter, he home invades and ties up the two adults. Then he ties up the child, and then he ties up the girl that I think he was targeting. But the simple reality is his very first crimes were of 4 people in the same house. And that does seem to mirror what we know about Kohberger in what happens in the crimes where he kills 4 people, but chooses not to kill another 2, but he kills 4 people in Moscow and Idaho.
And this case you're talking about that he may be copycatting. But
BTK Raider.
His professor was invested in that case in terms of...
She wrote the standard go-to book about Dennis Rader, and I did think...
Think that's linked?
You know, who can tell what these guys, how these guys are going to be turned on or turned off? For me, Kohberger, and I saw that there was something recently said that he was on the autistic spectrum, but for me, these guys are motivated because they want to stand out. They want to be noticed. They want to live a life less ordinary. And for some of them, for some of these people, living a life less ordinary can be achieved by being a killer. Which is why I'm always very keen and, and I read out deliberately the names of the victims. I think we should deny the killer the publicity and remember who it is that they killed rather than them, because that's so often we're playing into their game. And of course, we play into that game with people like Ted Bundy in particular, Fred and Rose West. You know, we always remember these kind of iconic serial killers as opposed to the people whom they predated, who they preyed upon.
So the definition of a serial killer, if Kohberger is out for infamy or wants to go down as a serial killer, does this qualify for students in their beds sleeping as a serial killer?
No, this would be regarded as multiple murders, mass murder. A serial killer was originally defined by the FBI, and Kathleen Ramsland worked for the FBI for a while. FBI originally defined in the 1970s a serial killer as an individual who kills 3 or more victims in a period of greater than 30 days. So, and usually there's a cooling off period in between each victim. So 3 or more victims, a numeric threshold, in a period of greater than 30 days. So this doesn't count as serial murder, although of course the FBI have changed the definition from the 1970s. I've tended to stick with the original definition.
Do you think then, if his MO was to go down as a serial killer, then he would know this too, in terms of what the definition was. Would he have done it again? Would he have done more if he hadn't been caught?
Yeah. They never stop unless they're caught. They don't get tired of it. In my experience, they continue. But of course, one of the odd things about Kohberger, and we've been talking about him being a PhD student in criminology, remember, he left the sheath of the knife that he used as the murder weapon. And so if you were good at criminology, why leave the sheath of the knife? You know, it doesn't kind of...
Is that taunting police? Is that part of the game?
It could be, it could be. The other thing to remember is that we're talking about Kohberger here, but in this country, there's been a PhD student in criminology who committed serial murder, who actually is a serial killer. It's somebody called Stephen Griffiths, who was studying criminology at the University of Hull, and he became better known as the crossbow cannibal. So this is not just simply an American phenomenon that we've been describing. And we've got problems in relation to people like Stephen Griffiths, who, by the way, went to the same school as another British serial killer. He went to Wakefield Grammar School, and he went to the same school as John George Haigh, the acid bath murderer. And the legend has it, new boys at Wakefield Grammar were taken to see the desk in the basement of John George Haigh as a kind of terrible forewarning. You better behave or you end up like this guy. Stephen Griffiths did actually end up like that guy.
Do you think your profession will take notice of it's a criminology student who's done this?
Yeah, I think we're all a bit worried. There are lots of criminologists, and I mentioned Stephen Griffiths, but there's been a recent case at the University of Greenwich of a criminology student who asked his tutor, how would you commit the perfect murder? And she is quoted as saying to him, "You're not thinking of killing someone, are you?" And he went on to kill a woman on Brighton Beach. So, yes, all of us are a bit worried. And all of us are now consciously, I think, engaging with students in the way that I've described. There's a lot of self-censorship, and there's a lot of trying to explain that this is a theoretical discipline as much as that can be applied in relation to murder and serial murder.
So he's changed his plea. He's pleading guilty. Does that have to be accepted?
Well, it has been accepted.
It has been.
It has been accepted. And so...
so there's no way he can face the death penalty then? He has escaped that?
He's escaped the death penalty. And he's escaped going into the witness box. Would he have gone into the witness box? Who knows? But perhaps. And by going into the witness box, or just simply by there being a court case, there would have been more information come into the public domain that might have answered some of the questions that you've been legitimately answering. But no, he's accepted the plea bargain. He's taken the plea bargain. The plea bargain has been accepted by the state, and the judge was simply 2 days ago saying, you understand this is a plea bargain, you are willingly accepting this, you realize the consequences of accepting the plea bargain. The consequences would be he's never going to be released from prison, and he will never be able to appeal what has happened in relation to this particular court case.
Well, may he rot in hell, quite frankly, those kind of characters. We want to talk about something else today, again, that's happening just pretty much as we speak, which is new developments in the Lucy Letby case.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, which is given rise to a whole bunch of questions, but the main one being, and does this mean Lucy Letby, may not be as guilty as we thought? And just explain why.
Well, this is because of two developments. As we know, Lucy Letby is serving a whole life tariff for after having been convicted of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 7 other babies at the Countess of Chester Hospital. She has appealed those convictions on 2 occasions and been refused, but there has been she now has a new KC called Mark MacDonald, and he's claiming that Lucy Letby is the biggest miscarriage of justice in English legal history. Now, what happened this week is that Cheshire police arrested and then bailed 3 senior managers at the Countess of Chester Hospital for gross negligence manslaughter. Now, that immediately made people think,
that's what I thought. It's not Lucy, it's them.
It's them.
That's what I thought.
I know. And several journalists phoned me up saying, does this mean that Letby is innocent? And I went, no, the gross negligence manslaughter is as a consequence that they could have stopped her earlier because there were a couple of whistleblowers, a couple of people working at the Countess of Chester Hospital who kept flagging up that they were concerned that Lucy Letby was behaving in ways which were unprofessional and perhaps also leading to children dying. They were ignored effectively. And indeed, on one occasion, one of the people who was saying that they were concerned about her behavior was forced to write her a letter of apology. Now, so the Cheshire police have arrested 3 former senior managers for gross negligence manslaughter, because the implication being they could have stopped her before all these children became victims.
But not willfully enabling her, but just negligence.
Just negligence. And of course, there is still a corporate manslaughter case that is being investigated by the Cheshire Police, and there may be subsequent charges in relation to that. But in the wake of those 3 arrests for gross negligence manslaughter, the other thing that only yesterday, as we're recording this podcast, Cheshire Police said they have submitted a file to the CPS to consider 6 further charges against Lucy Letby herself in relation to cases both at the Countess of Chester Hospital and at Liverpool Women's Hospital. So what's effectively happening is that 2 things. Cheshire Police have said we're bringing gross negligence manslaughter charges against these 3 former senior managers, and we have taken to the CPS, we've taken to them a file that includes 6 other cases of charges that we are seeking to bring against Lucy Letby. Now, who's most upset by that? Who's most upset by that is Lucy Letby's new KC, Mark MacDonald, who claims that this is actually a miscarriage of justice and is trying to take that claim through the Criminal Cases Review Commission. So it couldn't have come at a worse time for the kind of argument that Mark MacDonald is making.
And of course, it plays into the conspiracy theorists who will refuse to accept that she is guilty and it has to be something else. I don't know why. But they'll be looking at the evidence from noises off from medics who weren't involved in the trial, who since have suggested various reasons that it wasn't her, including maybe it was just like a bad year for the hospital and its numbers were bad in terms of infant mortality, which would then, if you didn't read into it, would then make you think, so that's why they've arrested the hospital managers. It must be badly managed hospital, not the nurse herself. So you can see that's where that would whip them up. And you'd like to think if they read further into it, the reasons why you're explaining why they have been arrested and why they're being investigated more, you'd see why, but they don't. They don't actually go any deeper.
Well, remember, one of the things that Mark MacDonald has been very successful in doing, and he's got a number of high-profile politicians on his side. Also, David Davis, for example, saying that Letby has been the victim of a miscarriage of justice. Remember, he's been very successful at creating this campaign, and he has a number of respected people, a number of medical experts saying that, well, look, I might have interpreted things in this way. I would have looked at a baby who died in these circumstances, not by concluding this, but by concluding something else. And this is an international panel of medical experts. But one of the things that I have said repeatedly, none of those experts are giving an opinion in a court of law. They're not being cross-examined. And nor do I think have they often been given access to all the information that they would need to make a fully definitive opinion in relation to how those babies became harmed or indeed died. And quite apart from all of that, which is what I've stuck with from the very first time you and I discussed this, what I've always stuck with is I don't see what's new about what's being stated by this international panel of experts. And what they are saying could have been presented at the time of Letby's trials. She was on trial twice. All of that medical contradiction to what was being alleged by the prosecution, proven by the prosecution as far as the jury was concerned beyond reasonable doubt, all of that could have been brought in by her defense at the time. So for me, there has not really been anything which is new.
And what we're all forgetting, although I didn't, when I was out this morning, we avoided doing the story, the new developments really, because I just thought of the sensitivity of it and who's thinking about the families? who's thinking about the parents of these children in terms of every time it's brought up again, they just want closure. They believe she did it. They don't want to have to think again, oh, crikey, here we go. Who could it have been? Maybe it wasn't her. Maybe it was somebody else. So I think there's a real duty on certainly journalists to a degree to just think as well, is it genuine new evidence that's coming through before we reopen the whole can of worms?
Well, good for you for saying that, because I kind of feel that the families, I feel we should be a bit more humble about what's happening, as opposed to constantly shouting from the rooftops. And let me read, because, Mark McDonald gets a lot of publicity. I've not really heard the following quote from Richard Baker, KC, who is representing the families of the children who were murdered. And he says, and so Richard Baker, KC, is saying, there's nothing remarkable or new about materials passed to the CCRC. And families of the babies killed have become, and I'm quoting, a sideshow within a ghoulish media circus. And that's why I think we should be a bit humble about what's happened. It's not our children who've been dead. And this kind of using Lucy Letby as a kind of part of the culture war.
Well, it's become clickbait.
Yeah.
And no one really thinks what's behind that, do they? It's almost like race to the bottom. Who can get the biggest headline? Who can sell the most? Who can get the most views? And listen, let's face it, I think podcasters are just as much in the firing line in terms of the spotlight for this as well. They should be thinking about not just, oh God, isn't this amazing? Maybe it's not true. Maybe she's not guilty. Maybe it's miscarriage, whatever it is. Guess what? Every time you say that, there's a knock-on effect from a family member who will have heard it. So let's make sure that you really are convinced, really think it is worth taking down that road before you upset a family who would just like to go on with their lives now.
I'm always very careful, and I try to be measured about what I say in relation to why I believe Lucy Letby is guilty, because I am trolled mercilessly as soon as I say anything about Lucy Letby. And if it's...
Well, that's that Madeleine McCann as well. We did Madeleine McCann a few weeks ago. And, quite frankly, the only emails we get are from the conspiracy theorists who say that we're part of the conspiracy.
Well, I was quoted as saying on Australian television, I agreed to speak to Australian 60 Minutes about Lucy Letby. And I said, Letby, people no longer want to look at evidence in relation to that case. They simply want to have an opinion. They want to go based on their emotion about Lucy Letby, as opposed to facts, as opposed to the judicial process. And she becomes part of the culture war. And I've said, Martin, there are some people now who kind of look at Lucy Letby as Saint Lucy of Letby. They celebrate her birthday. They send her fluffy toys in prison. She's in jail, obviously. She's serving a whole life tariff. And she becomes this kind of vessel to hold arguments about conspiracy theory, but also about the silencing of nurses in a hierarchical culture, about hospitals. And, I used that quote about the ghoulish media circus, but there's a ghoulish medical circus as well. That I want some of those people who are international experts to just really think carefully about why they're lending their names sometimes without having, as I see it, all the information that they might need to have. And above all, I just want people to accept that we can legitimately disagree without needing to destroy one of the doctors who gave evidence in this case for the prosecution. The people that go for his reputation seem to me to be losing the plot.
And you can see why some good experts would rather not get involved in trials anymore, because they just don't want the hassle. They don't want to put their heads above the parapet now to be shot at.
Yeah. I genuinely thought I was going to be called at one stage in the trial because I wrote the research. I did the peer review research about nurses who will kill in a hospital setting. And Lucy Letby doesn't fit that research. She's an outlier, which again, I've been very happy to say publicly and on record. She doesn't fit what we know of other nurses who've killed in a hospital setting.
But it doesn't mean to say she's innocent.
It doesn't mean to say she's innocent. It's just she's an outlier to the research.
Well, that's really interesting. So that's 2 cases we've done. There was a 3rd case we were hoping might have ended today, but it hasn't. And this is in Australia. This is Erin Patterson. This is the Beef Wellington mushroom killer, allegedly. And, well, no, actually, no. She did kill them.
She did.
It's whether
it's murder.
So we're filming this on a Friday. Yet to see whether the judge is going to keep the jury, who've been out for 5 days now working on this, bring them in over the weekend, or maybe he lets them home until next Monday. But it's dragging on. But give me your thoughts on this, because you and I are at polar opposites on this. You think she's as guilty as hell. I think that I give her the benefit of the doubt, and she's just a rubbish cook, and with dreadful consequences, obviously. But the fact that it's taken a jury 5 days and they still haven't got anything, does that play into her favour now in terms of they're really struggling, and I presume the judge would only take a unanimous verdict, or they go to a retrial?
Yeah. We're recording on a Friday. In Australia, they can sit on a Saturday as well. What I think all of this proves is the standard to find somebody guilty in a criminal trial is beyond reasonable doubt. And we've been talking about Lucy Letby. 2 juries found beyond reasonable doubt her guilt. In relation to Erin Patterson, they're taking their time because they have to be satisfied that the evidence that's been presented meets that standard to convict her. And Erin Patterson has been very well defended. Erin Patterson's argument is, yes, people died, but she did not intend their death. She had no mens rea. This was a tragic and terrible accident for which she feels great remorse. Now, a jury therefore has to be convinced that that remorse is, we accept there's remorse there, but did she intend to do this? Now, the evidence for that is quite complex, is intricate. It involves what I've always called to you the game of phones. I can never work out how many phones Erin Patterson had and why she was constantly factory resetting them. It's quite complex and circumstantial. But the jury are rightly taking their time because that's the standard of proof that needs to be met so as to find her guilty.
And just a final point, which I always found interesting and still do, the judge was at great pains to stress to the jury, you don't have to have a motive here. You just have to be beyond reasonably doubt convinced that she intended to kill them. For whatever reason, you just have to believe that that's what she wanted to do.
Well, it's interesting because people always ask us about the motive. People are always fascinated by the motive because drama is so often about the motivation of the perpetrator. Why did they do that? But you don't need to have a motive in relation to a murder charge.
But you want the story to be sort of rounded off.
Yeah.
You want to get to the end of the final chapter, and that's why. And if you don't get that, you're left out.
You feel cheated.
Yes, you're disappointed, you're let down. You want to know why. A bit like, Kohberger, I want to know why he's done this. P. Diddy, I'd like to know why he did those things, but...
Well, he's a thug. That's why he did those things.
Yeah, well, yes, I know, but what drives him to that, but it could be his background. But with her, I'd like to know as well. I'll be very disappointed if she's found guilty and we still don't know what the motive is.
Well, I think we do know what the motive is, though, don't we?
I'm not sure, but we've discussed it. That's for the next one when it does come out, and it will be. Surely it can't be that much longer that we will know whether Erin Patterson is guilty or walks free. I mean, that will be some picture if she walks free out of that courtroom, won't it?
Would you put her on this morning?
Absolutely. Well, if she's not guilty, she doesn't have a criminal record, I want to hear from her, of course. But she'll be doing Channel 7, my great friends down in Australia, before they ever do anybody at ITV, I'm quite sure. But no, it's a sensational story. And that is literally, as we're speaking, it is developing and will come out in the next day or two, I'm sure.
And if we tie up a few of the themes of these disparate cases that we've discussed, Erin Patterson, there is, if she's found not guilty, there's a book deal, there's a film deal, there's the media circuit, there will be speaking tours. And remember when I said, some of these people want to live a life less ordinary? Here we have it. This is the life less ordinary, even though people died. And if she's found not guilty, because it was a tragic accident.
And of course, you've got the streamers now, and we've discussed before, you and I, how they do a fantastic job of these recreations or turning into drama documentaries, which of course do marvelous numbers for streamers. Some of their biggest ones. The Mortician is who was HBO's biggest, 5 million, I think they had just in the first few days. Their biggest kind of crime effort.
An extraordinary, we both discussed it, an extraordinary true crime documentary.
Yeah, and so you get all this interest in those things. And of course, you get the rise in podcasts, and we're part of that too. And all of a sudden, true crime, real crime is out there. And then here we go to finish off what we're talking about now. You get people who want to learn more about it and turn up in your classes, and then they go and commit it themselves. It's almost like a full...
It is. It's a full circle. So there will be a drama documentary about this.
You're to blame.
Who would play you in the drama documentary?
Well, Brad Pitt's getting too old now for me, isn't he? That's the thing. It'd have to be a Scotsman, wouldn't it? Yeah. I don't know. Who would play you, though?
Oh, George Clooney. Come on. Yeah. Don't you think there's a Clooney aspect to me?
It could be the Scottish crime family, you and I just together, yes. I'd be the investigator, and you're the one that's you're the architect of the perfect crime because you've studied them all.
And it's the most common question I'm asked on tour. Professor Wilson, if you were to commit a perfect crime, what would you do? And I go, I'm never going to answer that question.
I mean, you do know, but you're not going to tell.
Yeah. Yes, I do.
Now, if you were short of a bob or two, and it wasn't,
No.
if it wasn't going to mean, any people lost money, it was like a big thing that they could happily lose, you'd know how to do that. Are you talking violent crime? Are you talking fraud, or what?
Oh no, they were meaning the perfect murder, really.
All right.
And of course, I know how to do that.
So just look out, folks, if you ever see Professor Wilson with starry eyes, goes quiet all of a sudden. Things are coming. Professor, thank you so much. It's been fascinating. It's good just to talk about this, isn't it? Just get stuff through.
Yeah.
As opposed to picking up on one particular thing. It's good to sort of just clear, literally, it's this is what's happening this week in crime.
And it's wonderful that we've reached our 16th episode.
Yep, still here. 17th one, I guarantee will be in the next day or two, and it'll be on Erin Patterson. I say she's going to walk. You say she's going to jail. Let's see who wins that one. Until the next time. Bye now.